Okay, we're going to be talking about grass today. We're going to be making some grass. Let's take a look and see what are we doing. So this is just some grass that I made in SpeedTree and then brought it into Unreal Engine. It's got vertex animation on it as well. You can see some of them moving. If you look really, really close to where the character is, you can see some of the grass swaying very slowly. And then there are little tufts of little other, these little purple guys in here too. We're not going to be making this exact grass. We are going to be making a different one from scratch, and then see where we end up. Now, if you just take a look at the frame rate and the render complexity here, the lower LOD with the higher polygons are pretty well optimized, but then the lower LOD, if you look further away, they're not so well optimized. So they're going wide. You could optimize those if you wanted by adding more geometry, but I don't want to do that, so I'm choosing the trade-off between more geometry versus more overdraw. And in this case, I'm going for more overdraw because I'm getting better results with my particular setup. And you can see the frame rate here as the grass adjusts. It dips a little bit and then it just picks back up, and then it sort of stays there. So sometimes it'll dip to like 80 from 120, and then it just jumps back up to over 100, and there it's staying there at about 100. And that's because of all the LOD transitioning that it needs to do in recalculating these transparent textures. So I could come in here and optimize those lower LODs a bit more if I wanted to. Grass that is similar to this, but we're not going to be recreating this exact grass. So I want to do something different. Just going to take a quick look at this particular grass. So it's created using these little tufts of grass, which then have a level of detail applied to them. And at the lowest level, it becomes a billboard, which is the most efficient to render. Which is contains the least amount of geometry, but it contains the most overdraw, because it's effectively a series of directional stacked cards. They're not always facing the camera, as you can see as I'm swiveling or orbiting around here. They're actually swapping in and out, and they even have a top-down view. So these are all separate cards. Okay, so first off, and let's quickly take a look at some of the textures. This is the leaf material. This was generated by SpeedTree, and then SpeedTree also I exported these textures from SpeedTree as an atlas. Which will then pack these textures. I'm going to start by just quickly opening up that grass in SpeedTree. I'm using SpeedTree modeler version 8.3.1, the UE4 Subscription edition, and I'm using Unreal Engine 4.21. So you can see this is just a simple little setup here with the leaf meshes, where the leaf meshes are using either a Grass 1 or Grass 2 material, and they have their own little mesh cutouts here with different levels of detail. So this is level of detail low, medium, and high. So that's LOD 0 for high, 1 for medium, and 2 for low. And I've also set that up to use that level of detail in here, but we're going to be going through that anyway. And then as you increase the level of detail, or decrease the level of detail, I actually also scale up the grass. as well as lowering the vertex count. And then this second leaf mesh here, if you take a look at some of these properties here, looking at final adjustments, the second one here is just a duplicated one there, where I've just adjusted this to be half of the or 180 or 90 degrees offset, where 0 is 0 and 1 is, I think, 180 degrees rotation. And then let's just quickly take a look at the texture that we're using here. I'm using B889. So it's this guy here. So looking at the texture, so looking at that texture, this is an oddly sized texture, but I've then obviously brought that into, I'm using Bitmap to material from Substance, and then before I did that, I resized it to 1024 by 1024, but you'll see that. So this was resized to 1024 by 1024. And then brought into Bitmap to material, and then I created, exported some textures from that, which we're going to be doing now as well. But the point of this exercise was to talk about this texture, because looking at the different textures for grass, some of them work well for this kind of grass setup, and some of them do not work well. Especially thick, tufty grass like this, it doesn't look great. And also the other problem is these were created from very low resolution grass textures, 512 by 512. So you want to try and look for something that's higher than that. It doesn't matter if they're, I mean, look at this one. This is 120 by 120. So when you bring that into a 1024 by 1024 map, apply that, and then export. Ask SpeedTree to export this to an atlas of 2048. It's going to look extremely pixelated, and your grass doesn't look nice. So you want to try and find something that's at least 1024. Grass like this also not too bad. This can work all right. Not crazy about the hard line here at the bottom, but these will usually be sunken in a little bit anyway. So this could also work, but this just looks a little bit too stylized. But it might end up looking nice. I don't know where I got all of these textures. Some of them I took myself of grass. Like, well, this isn't really grass. This is something else. Plants, whatever. These I took myself, but they don't work great. Little blades like that don't work right. There are other ways to create them as well. You could use 3D modeling software and model a few blades, clump them together, repeat them as instances, and then you can generate your own clumps, similar to look something like this. To look something like this is pretty good, like this here, which is the one that I'm using in this particular case. And then sources for textures, the ones I use. It varies. There's CG textures, which they've changed their name. There's CG textures that have changed their name. They're now textures.com. There's texturelib.com. They also started a new site, bigtexture.com, but haven't had a lot of success there. And then there's gametextures.com. They're also pretty good, but their subscription, I think their subscription. There's Quixel, and then there's also a great one, Substance Share. They've also got some good textures there. There are also other places where you can, you know, Google them and buy texture, just massive libraries that you can just download and buy. I've been collecting textures for many years. Looking at textures.com, they've got a couple blades of grass that I really like at textures.com. Like this one would work pretty good as well, I would think. It's a nice little tuft of grass, but to get this is the one you really want, the 1024 by 1024, and for that you need to buy premium credits. So that could be worth it if you do something like that once off. I've used the lower resolution ones, but they don't look great. The 512 ones, they don't look great. These guys, Gain Textures, I think they've got some as well, some nice ones. Here you can see some of them, wild grass. Might be okay. Also, I'm not crazy about the textures where they're too tightly clumped together at the base. That also doesn't look great. There's always going to be some transparency which you want. It always looks just a little bit better. Otherwise you're going to be seeing very hard and harsh lines. Depending on your texture. This is also nice, but then, these are also a little bit tricky. If you download a 2K bitmap, considering this is an atlas, you're going to be getting very little tufts, so you want to try and get these as big as you can. If you can get these at 1024, that would be the best. So these guys are going to probably be less than 512. One of these, so that's something to also consider. That might not look so great. So yeah, you're gonna need to find something that and try it out and see what works for you and what doesn't, and what works for the look that you're going for. Let's take a look at this. Okay, so this is coming through as a sheet. We could try this. So what we get in that sheet is quite a few things. This has been packed for UE4, so I'm not actually going to be using any of these. I'm just going to be using the color and the opacity. Let's start a new SpeedTree. Right, so let's start in SpeedTree. So we're going to be using this High Street texture here, and let's bring it in. So, okay, then, yeah, we do actually need, there are some things we're going to need. We're going to need some more maps. I prefer generating these maps using, I prefer generating the normal maps and height maps and the ambient occlusion and things like that using Substance Bitmap 2 material. I'm setting my resolution to 1024, and then I'm just gonna drop this in here as the main input, and it doesn't look like much. Also not crazy about the bleeding that's happening everywhere. So let's see if we can quickly resolve that. I don't think it's really necessary. It's not adding anything, so let's fix that. Just add an alpha channel here, bring this guy in. And I'm just going to paste that in there for the alpha, and then I'll select it, invert my selection, and just remove that hideous bleeding background that they've got there, and I'm just going to default this to some kind of green, just to have something in there, maybe a little bit darker, something like that. That's okay. It's a bit better. I'm not crazy about that bleeding effect. It's not going to really add anything for what I want to go for. So I'm just going to override the base color here. And if you can do that with any imaging software like GIMP or whatever, if you don't have Photoshop. Okay, this is looking a little bit better. Right, so then we hit export as bitmap. So I just dropped the image in there and set it to use main input. Set my output size to 1024, and then I'm exporting. I'm not changing any of the values, I don't need to. Just going to make sure that I'm working inside that folder there. And I'm going to be keeping this texture name here. I want to use PNG, not TGA. That's just personal preference. I'm not exporting the base color. So I want roughness, metallic, the spec. Also, I'm not exporting the diffuse, the gloss, the normal, and the ambient occlusion. So roughness, metallic, spec, gloss, normal, and AO. Pump that out. I don't need this anymore. I can close it. So I'm going to, and there we go. And then I'm just going to assign these in here quickly. Oh, yeah, we need to first create a new material here. So in SpeedTree, under materials, so in SpeedTree under materials, we need to create a new material here. I'm just going to call this grass mat. And then I'm just going to quickly drop these in the right slots. Actually didn't need roughness, so I'm going to delete it. And the last one, ambient occlusion there. I am going to be using subsurface. So what I do is I just turn this up to 1 for 100%, and then I'm just going to color pick off the palette here. And I don't like the bright subsurface color, so I'm just going to darken it. I prefer it when it's darker. Because it just looks a little bit weird, and I'm turning up the variations up here just a little bit, just a teensy weensy little bit. And let's save this quickly. Just gonna call this grass 1, and then remember to make this material two-sided. Needs to be two-sided. Okay. Next step, we need to add some meshes. So we're going to be cutting out meshes from this material here. So I'm going to hit edit here. I'll start with the first one. So I'm going to just show opacity here because it's easier to see. I'm not going to be creating meshes from all of these. I'm just going to do 2. But you can create as many as you want. So the idea here is to use up as little, to get as little transparency as you can for them, and as much mesh as you can with as little geometry as possible. So it's always a trade-off. And I'm doing the lower LOD first, so I'm going to be cutting into the texture. So it's actually going to be creating a leaf card. or a card geometry from this. So that's the plane that it's going to be creating, and there's my pivot. So that's the first thing I adjusted. That's where I wanted to sit on the ground. So this will be a level of detail low, so LOD 2. That's why I'm cutting off quite a bit. I might even cut off more. I might just bring it in a little bit more there to try and reduce the transparency. So here I'm just going for 4, so let's use that for low. And then what I'll do for medium is just expand these out a little bit. And then for high, I want to make sure everything is visible. But you could mask out a lot of these transparent areas. So it's always a trade-off between more transparency versus more geometry. And I always prefer a little bit more transparency. Okay, let's get rid of this guy. I'm not going to be masking out anything here or there. I would have liked to mask that out a little bit in here, but it's going to be adding too many points. So this has got 9 vertices. It's got 8 faces. For me, that's enough for one little tuft, which are then going to get duplicated. So that's fine. And then the medium is 6 vertices, 4 faces, and then this the low is 4 vertices, 2 faces. That's more than enough, I think. So there's going to be a lot of overdraw here. Which could be a problem. Okay, because it's got a lot of transparent areas. So that's one mesh. Let's do one more. So I go back to my material and I just click add here. I just want to make sure my max resolution is set to original, and then I'll just edit. And let's do this guy here at the top. So my pivot. Now I don't mind that it's cutting off parts of the geometry, because this is for far away, so I don't mind. So that's going to be low. That'll be medium, and then with high I'll make sure that I can see everything. Also might be possible, let's see, here we can use some masking. So if I come in here, I can tell it to just ignore that triangle there. Make this a little bit more efficient render-wise, and that will be high. And that's 11 vertices, 10 faces. Medium is 6 vertices, 4 faces, and low is 4 vertices, 2 faces. Not too bad. So I'm going to be using these two meshes or mesh groups. All right. In SpeedTree, now the next step is to start placing these. Now you could obviously come in here and back to your materials, and you could add more of these cutouts to get more variation in your grass. And you could also add different materials, you know, and have completely different looking grass depending on your biome or environment. But I'm just going to be creating these for now. So just looking at my grass here, this is a pretty large radius. I'm going to knock this down to about 4, so it's a much smaller area. And then we're going to be using leaf meshes. We're going to be using that. So to assign the leaf mesh to this guy, there's 2 ways you could do that. And what I'm going to do is just go to material and just choose grass material, and on mesh I'm going to use any, so it'll decide. It'll choose between these two meshes here. I could add this one, specify cutout, add it again, specify cutout too, but with any it'll just randomly choose every time you place cards. The first thing I need to do is this guy is oriented funny. It's not correctly oriented, so I'm just going to start by going to final adjustments. There we go. So arc needs to be 0.5, and then it's really low on the ground plane. So I'm going to be I want it to sink in just a little bit. And I can do that here using the sink. So I just want it to sink in a little bit. I think 0.07 is okay. And we need to add some more of these. And I don't like that they're spread out so much. So I was just playing with this number here. So I'm going to keep this to around about 20, I think is okay. So in total, all of these together are 180 triangles. At LOD, at this level of detail, the highest level of detail. So I want to bring them in because I feel they're... So I do that by going to the boundaries, and we just... I don't want them clumping together there like that either in the center. So I'm just moving them out from each other a little bit and just bringing them in slightly. Until I find something that I think is okay. This is also another trade-off where if you spread them out too far, this grass is going to go onto unyieldy or unwieldy terrain. That terrain is not always going to be flat, and it's going to be using the pivot point of your model. And this is a model that you're building here. This is a SpeedTree model where the pivot is set to the origin, and it will align this model based on the pivot, the normal of the surface that it's hitting. So if you've got a mesh like this, a model that's, whatever the shape is, circular or whatever, and then you've got a terrain, it's going to find a point, latch onto it, but then there's going to be grass that's going to be not aligned to the surface, because Unreal Engine is not going to come in and pick any one of these individual grass blades and put them on the terrain. It doesn't work like that. It's going to be using this model as a whole and the pivot. It's not going to be using each individual clump that you add here. If you want to do something like that, then you just make these clumps of yours much smaller, use less geometry here, make your clumps only 1 or 2 or 3, and then you can get a much tighter sitting grass. You're obviously going to be rendering, you're going to be taking a performance hit because you're going to be rendering more models, and each with their own transformation matrix. So they probably will be instanced. Of course they're instanced because it's foliage, but you're still going to be taking a hit. So I prefer, it's a trade-off again, so you got to decide between how wide you want to go versus how tight you want the grass to sit on your terrain. And you can look at any game, and there are you'll see floating grass. There's no way of getting around that. If this is the method they're using, the other method is placing each and every single, little tuft procedurally, which also obviously will work. But then each tuft has its own transformation matrix where these guys, all of these tufts only share one, so it's pretty efficient. Okay, so that goes for floating anything, rocks, scatter rocks, things like that. Yeah, so you can see they're not all the same-ish. This is the first cutout, and that's the second cutout there. Just took me a little while because this one's a little bit thicker and this one's a little bit thinner. Let's bring them back to where they were. So you can see it's randomly choosing between which ones to use. Now also, I think this is, I think those are meters. I could be wrong. But if that is the case, then this grass is way too long and way too big. So you could bring that down with the size scaler, bring the size scaler down. And just keep them. Here we go. So there's a man. Scale wise, you can use this. So there's a person. So if I put this back to where it was, so that's about, oh, this is in foot. There's no ways that that's 6 meters, right? So this is in feet. But when you export your work in centimeters, it's really confusing. Okay, I see. So this size scaler is actually in feet. So that's 1 foot. I think that's pretty high for grass. Just get a feeling it's going to be a little bit too thick, too high. But it might be good to do this anyway and then re-import it to show you that workflow, because to make changes to this grass is actually pretty easy, and then to bring it back in is going to be pretty easy too. We're going to be using the grass type shader to put this over our terrain. But now this is looking a bit sad. They're not looking great, and I still think, I think they're a little bit too high. I'm going to sink them in a little bit more. Let's go for 0. Let's go for something like that. 0.13. Let's just sink them in a bit more. Then we need to add, there's a few more things I want to change here. Well, not a lot. You could fiddle with this quite a lot. So for fold, and then you could also add some randomness to the up to give them a little bit of, so this just adds a bit of randomness to everything that you're doing. For the fold, you see what the fold does. It folds the geometry. So for fold, I'm going to go for a max 0.3 and then a random of 0.1. For curl, 0. I'm not crazy about that. It's a bit high. I'm not crazy about that either. Let's bring this down. I think that's all right. Yeah, I think that was just a little bit too high. I'm just going to leave everything at 0.1 and then twist. So that just creates the illusion that it's a bit more three-dimensional than it really is. It doesn't always look great when it's this bent, depending on the geometry that you're using. So I might come in here and just lower these values again at some point. The next step I want to do is I just want to double check the level of detail here. So as the level of detail decreases, yeah, I want the size to increase, but I want this size to increase more. So I'm going to knock it up to 2. and you can see it's really sunk in. So I need to bring that up a little bit. I think it's too far sunken in now. I'll just do it like that, 0.05. I think that's okay. Let's see. Yeah, so something like that would work, because it's going to look like that from far away. So you want to still have the illusion that there's a lot of grass there when it isn't. And we need to do the wind as well before I duplicate it. So for wind, that's what we want. Okay, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this. Parent it to the same one, but in this case, these guys I'm going to rotate them using final adjustments to the right for 0.5 with a little bit of randomness as well. So it creates the illusion that there's, you know, more grass here than there really is. I do not know what this is going to look like when we start brushing this on a terrain. Well, we're not going to be brushing, we're going to be using the grass type shader, so I don't know what this is going to start looking like. It might not look great. And you might need some thicker tufts or puffs, you know, and then you can come in here and play. Let's give this a save, and then there's another thing that's also useful, is randomize. You could come in here and just hit randomize and it will just give you random grass again. So sometimes that's also useful, but the problem is when you do that is you lose your offsets from your this guy to this guy. So then they become very one-dimensional. It's better to delete this guy. It's better to delete this guy, then hit randomize, and then duplicate him again. And just set your right out to 0.5 again, and there you have grass that's not. It looks totally different than the ones you had just now. It's a nice little trick. So you could do that too. I'm deciding which one I'm going to use. It doesn't really matter. I mean, it's all random anyway. Right, so that's this step done, and they all should have wind, whatever animation on them, vertex animation applied to them. That's important. That was what I was doing here with the wind wizard. The next step is I'm going to press O to generate ambient occlusion. See the subsurface kicking in there. It looks really black and dark. It's probably going to look like that in the engine too. So if that's too dark or too black, then you need to come and adjust your subsurface here, or your ambient occlusion settings. I'm just going to press Ctrl E and export this, and I'm going to stay in the same, keep my stuff together here. The options I do want LODs, and I do want a billboard for grass. I do want to make sure that I'm using packing for UE4. I do want non-wrapping. I do want the variations and the seam blends. Seam blends aren't really used here. It's more for branches and things like that. Branches and trunks. But the variations are used. They will vary. That's what this does, depending on your season. It'll vary the colors of your leaves slightly. But if you overdo this, it starts looking very, very weird. It's just to break the colors up a little bit better. And then I'm using an atlas of 2048. That's why I chose here Atlas must be non-wrapping. I generally don't change these except for, I think, some of the bushes and trees that I've done. I might do a video on trees, but it depends. I don't like billboards for everything. It doesn't always look good everywhere, but for trees you definitely want billboards because you're going to be creating forests, and they do not. You don't want thousands of trees each with a level of detail 2, or the lowest level of detail, the highest level of detail. I always get confused between that. What would you call it? Because when you're moving up to a higher level of detail, you're moving to a lower resolution polygon. So it's a bit confusing, but the level of detail where your polygon has, where your mesh has the lowest or least amount of polygons, is your highest level of detail. It's LOD 2, 3, 4, whatever. So if that is still sitting at 1,000 and you're putting 100 or 1,000 trees out there, that's 100,000 polygons. It needs to get rendered in every frame, and you might not even be looking at them in great detail. And that's just what's going to happen if you have trees where the poly counts, or the triangles, are going to be sitting at well over 30, 40, 50,000, which is standard for a. It's not even a hero tree. It's just a nice looking tree that doesn't look like poo. That's what's going to happen. You're not going to get the level of detail on the highest level of detail. You're not going to get it down to like 10 or 20 or 30 vertices using just mesh reduction or SpeedTree's mesh reduction. So billboards are incredibly important because then they create these very nice cards. They used to always face the camera, and I see with newer versions they created cards depending on the angle that you're at, and the way they do that is they actually create a camera render an image of your tree in various static positions, and then just render that to a texture and just back those textures in an atlas, which is quite cool. I mean, you could also do that yourself, but it's nice that they do that for you. They also have a top-down, which is also a nice addition. They didn't always have a top-down, because in some games where you had billboards always facing you and you'd go up, the billboards weren't locked to the XY or the XZ plane, or the character look at plane. It would rotate anywhere. So if the character went too high, the trees would face you, and it would look like there's tree trunks, floating in the air. I think games like Morrowind and that use that kind of. That's why they stopped the flying at some point, and the levitation. Might not be Morrowind, might be Oblivion. But yeah, we've come a long way. I mean, look at Far Cry. Far Cry 3 was also using the same technology where they would go to billboards. But then they had the problem where they would cull their cave meshes based on distance. And if you were flying with or gliding with your glider, they would cull those cave meshes, and then you would see the holes in the terrain where they made holes for the caves. Which was quite cool, because then you know why that's there and how that's happening, because it's got to do with level of detail, with culling, and with that technology. Anyway, so we export the grass, LEDs, and billboard, non-wrapping atlas 2048, so 2K, and hit OK and see what happens. This might not work, might be complete disaster. I hope it isn't. Okay, after the export is done, I'm going to do nothing in SpeedTree. We're going to jump on over to that folder quickly. These are the things that it created. And these are my atlases that it created. And this is for the billboard. And this is for the actual, now this is a packed texture, which is why it looks weird, because it also contains the subsurface color. It's not just a normal texture. That's why it always looks a little bit weird when you look at it. And there's our subsurface and our normal. All right, so let's jump on over to Unreal Engine. There's a couple ways to do this. I'm going to be creating a new project. Well, we could use Blueprint. We don't have to use CPP. Because for this, I'm just going to be focusing on the grass. And I don't want to influence our project that we're working on now for this test. So normally you would create your terrain in your 3D modeling software like World Machine or World Creator or whatever you're using, or maybe you just come into Unreal Engine, get your Wacom tablet or your Wacom tablet and start painting that terrain. And then you would apply some textures on it, some materials, some landscape materials. Now, I've covered landscape materials in my World Creator import. I'm not going to be doing that here. I'm not going to be creating a whole terrain with grass, rocks, and all of that. So what I am going to do is I'm just going to head on over to a new level. I'm going to drop in a sky sphere. And there are some settings here that you would need to change. The sun's position, for example, is determined by I want it to be determined by directional light. So that's interesting. Never mind. Let's just do that. Okay. I'm not going to be messing around here with anything. Let's just save this level as a test level. See what happens when you play nothing, right? That's cool. Let's bring in, not bring in. We could bring in a terrain that was generated, or we could quickly generate one. But actually did that previously. Guess we could quickly do that. Okay, let's see. I'm using 210. It's already been updated. World Creator 210. I'm not going to be creating a tiled world here, and I'm most certainly not going to be spending a lot of time. So I'm just going to do something quick, export it, and then import it in here. And then we'll just put some grass on it. A 2K is fine. I'm using the 2K. I just want to change the seed here so we don't get the default, so we get something a little bit different. And then we'll just drop in a few filters here. And then we'll add canyon sand covered. Let's go for terrace. Actually, not really sure. Let's look under hills. Man, those are bad. Mountains. Okay, and then let's just add something a bit more interesting here. Plateaus. Yeah, plateaus are cool because we're going to be putting grass based on a slope. So this isn't. Oh, I forgot how to use this tool. Quick pro tip. If you untick the soil and you export and you choose Unreal, your scale is broken. It goes to minus 200, or is that 2 million? What is that? 208,000. And that's because you do need to tick soil before you export to get this correct value, and now it's 60.58. These mountains are going to look a little bit weird when you put a texture on them because they're stretching. Let's go for the sand covered filter as well. It's also going to be a lot of stretching. I'm not sure if I really like this. I'm just messing around here. Canyon smooth is a nice way to just remove all your stuff. And canyons, I really don't like this. Ridged, I guess this could work. Said we're going to be doing something quick, and I'm sitting here wasting time. Okay, let's give this a save. I'll go for archive. I'll put this in the same drive there. We'll just call this, yeah, grass taste, whatever. We'll do some textures quick. We can do 2 layers, just to give you a different. So I've imported these textures here into Unreal Engine, or into World Creator previously from their material library. You just go to the launcher and you'll figure out how to do that, because with the new versions they don't give you the libraries anymore. You have to go and download it. It's still free, and all the library is still free and all that. So, and then I'm just going to add another layer here and call this sand. Well, let's call this rock. I'm not going to bother with sand. And we'll just use rocky cliffs here, and then for rock, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to specify an angle between, slope between 45 and 90, just so we get that little break up there. So nothing special. So everything's going to be grass and the rest is going to be rock. Saved it, and let's export this to, you have to choose raw, best fit. I'm on Windows 16-bit and Unreal. I do want to flip Y here, and remember when I import this I have to use 54.22, but I already have a problem. Already did something wrong. I can't use 2048. That's not the correct size. We'll use the closest we can find with the least amount of components, because that should be the most efficient. So I'm going to go for, 2017 it is. So we'll go for 2017. That's it. And save. Let's export. Now it's 81.41. I'll put this in the same folder with the rest. And then let's do the textures as well, the heat map, sorry. And I'm looking for filters, change it to textures, flip Y, and we're going to be exporting grass and rock. Only 2 layers, because it's faster. Choose the same folder. Right, in Unreal Engine, I'm not going to be changing a lot of things here. I don't need to. I think. Let's start with the terrain. So I hit landscape, import from file, go and choose the thing we just exported, height map raw. It picks up its 2017 by 2017. I just need to fix the Z scale here to match this value here. It'll default to the most efficient values here anyway. I could verify that. Yeah, 16 by 16 components. All right, let's say import. Make sure that flip Y is not, it's not ticked. There's no option here, right? Yeah. Okay, import. Let's take a look. I'm not going to be using dynamic lighting. I do not like it. Ugh, static lighting, I don't like it. I think we're past static lighting now. This looks alright. I think it looks about accurate. There it is in Unreal Engine. Let me just get out of this tool quickly. Right, it's going that way. Let's see. Yeah, it's not too bad. I think it's alright. I'm just always amazed by the forward. So in this case, forward, this active forward is usually X, positive X. So we're actually facing negative Y. Because you flip the Y. No, then it would be positive Y. No. Okay, so we've imported the terrain from World Creator now. This is just a simple little terrain. The next thing we need now is our we need our material. So let me give this a save and let's do a quick landscape material. The quick and nasty. So I'm just going to go into my geometry folder here, create a material, call it landscape. I'm not going to be doing the whole tiling thing we did last time. I'm just doing a... So we're going to be using grass output as well, but let's start with landscape layer coords, because we do want the tiling to look like something. And then we need a layer blend. We'll go for... We only have grass and rock. So grass and rock. And then we'll just choose something that came with Unreal for our grass and rocky texture. And that's wrong. I need to duplicate this for the normal. I don't know what this rock basalt looks like, but we're using it. Okay, the normal there, hook up the coordinates, probably be setting them to something like 0.5 1 or 2 or 3, maybe more, maybe less. That's grass, that's rock, and that goes into normal, and then we give that a save. I'm going to be creating material instance, so we can set this on our landscape. Okay. The next step is, just want to check something here. I haven't done this in a little while because I've been working on other things. Okay, the next step is, let's go to our material, our landscape here, and we want to go to paint, and now we need to get some information in here. So I'm going to be creating a weight blended layer, or non-weight blended layer, weight blended. Just leaving this as default. Weight blended, leave that as default. And then right click on here, import from file. And then here I will choose grass. This is the thing we exported from. And ignore that message. Import from file. And use rock here, yes. Export it from World Engine, import it into here. Right, then it's going to look like poo, and it's very shiny. And it's going to look, oh wow, extremely tiled. That's pretty cool. Let's give everything a save, and let's fix a few things quickly, because they're going to annoy me. The first thing I want to fix is the spec. The landscape is not specular. It's definitely not metallic. And I want it to be as rough as possible. And I'm not going to be setting any of their values. So I'm not creating any. I'm not a huge fan of this adaptation. It really ruins overbrights everything. I don't know why. I just don't like it. I normally switch it off. So let's leave it for now. Let's just play with the scale quickly. Okay, let's go the other way. That's okay. It's going to look very tiled. Like I said, I'm not going for yeah, it's just very bright. Oh, okay. I can fix that quickly because it's going to irritate me. Let's bring in a post-process volume here. We'll set it to unbounded or unbound. Infinite extent. And then in here, for this exposure, I'm just going to keep these values. This value is the same. And don't make them 0. And there we go. Right. Just putting on some statistics quickly. And then let's just take a look at everything, right? We should be getting a nice and clean, steady 120 FPS. Our terrain has got its normal maps applied. The rocks should be where the rocks are. The rocks are where they should be, the rock textures. And you can see the tessellation on the terrain These textures don't look terrible. I mean, the grass texture looks pretty weird. And you can see the tiling there as you're following that line from there. So that's all what we expect to see. I want to lower the intensity of the sun a little bit. Because it's too bloody bright. Yeah, let's go for something like that. Right. And also want to check the shadow. Okay, so the sun is there. Right, got it. The next step is to bring in the grass type. So for that, let's create a folder here, just say grass. So I'm going to go to my folder where I exported the SpeedTree model, and I'm going to grab the correct one, which is the ST, and then we'll pop that in here. Before I do, I just want to switch off real time because it annoys me right now. I'm not using it. Okay, we're bringing in painted foliage. We are not doing any collision, and we are going to bring in the materials, the subsurface, and the vertex processing, and we import it. Hopefully it will work. We won't get any errors. Sometimes you do. And then I also want to bring in wind direction here. I'm just going to drop it in here. I'm not going to change any value as well. I might just bump up the strength to, let's bump it up to 0.5. And we'll make the gusts about 7. You don't need to worry about the radius or any of that. It's either going to work or it's not going to work, so it might just work now, but it might not. Looking at what was brought in, let's see what it looks like. So you can see the subsurface colors there are doing this little thing, and we've got eye adaptation as well in the editor. So let's switch that off. God knows why we have this. I just don't know. Right. Oh. Okay, now we've got that again. Can I set this to 0 with that? Ah, okay. Is it the same? No. Right. Back to the sky. All right. Is the eye adaptation working here as well? Auto. Okay, I see. Wow. Okay. So you can see they're looking a little weird. The color-wise, I don't mean the shape of the grass or anything. That looks okay for me. It's just the colors. It looks a little bit too lemony. Too much lemon. But we'll see when we start bringing it in now. So also the next thing I don't like is this LOD is transitioning way too fast. We're going to be up here. So when I'm up here, I don't want the grass to be on LOD 3 because it's going to look like poo. So we'll start by just making sure we setting these values ourselves. Auto compute LOD distances is off. And for LOD1, I want to transition at 0.3. On LOD2, 0.1. And LOD3, 0.05. Those are just the values I use for this kind of thing. Let's see. So up on here, it should be LOD0. And then it's going to transition there to 1. And then there is 2 about there, which is cool. So we'll see what that looks like. This looks about the right size, but I'd still re-import it just for fun to see, and then we might have to come and adjust these as well. There's nothing else here I'm going to set or change. The next thing now is just to go into the landscape material itself. And we need to get a render. It'd be nice if we could get a render of this, just to update the thumbnail. And I never ever remember how to update the thumbnail. You're gonna remember it for about a day and you'll forget it again. The next game you're gonna make, you're gonna remember it for a day and then you're gonna forget it again. Right, so let's do the grass type. And it's a little weird that you have to put it in here, but I guess it kind of doesn't make any sense to me. So we're going to go for a landscape grass output, even though it's not always just grass. So we've got grass, nice. And then we need a grass type. So foliage type, landscape grass type, got it. So it was under miscellaneous. Landscape grass type, I'm just going to call this grass type, and we'll add our variety here. We only have one, and we'll use our grass. This is our SpeedTree grass that we created. The density is set to 400. Let's just leave it as it is, and I'm not changing anything, and I'm just going to hook up this grass type. Oh, damn, son. Okay, so we need to sample the landscape layer. I completely forgot about that. Right, so you have to sample the landscape layer. I don't always use this often enough. You use this normally in the beginning of a project and then you forget it again. Alright, so we're sampling the landscape layer for grass, and then we're providing that as input to this grass type. And in the grass type we've specified our name. You can call this anything you want, it doesn't matter, it's not tied to the, but this name here has to match your layer correctly. And then there we specified our grass type. I'm pretty sure this could have just been one little thing. It doesn't need to be like this. Anyway, so give that a save. And let's take a look. It might not work. And I'm not seeing any grass. That is interesting. Also, just before I continue here, I do want to set the culling it's culling at 10,000. I want to go from 30,000 to 35,000. Maybe I need to enable an experimental setting. I think that's probably it. Could be wrong. Okay, just reopening that project. After enabling procedural foliage, might be that, I could be wrong. It's not that. Oh, that's interesting. You had to go into the management thing again. Okay, and then you can see the grass here looks pretty bad. That's also because of things. So let's fix this quickly. Yeah, I also thought that's way too many. Okay. And then they disappeared again. There we go. It's interesting that you have to keep on going back to that. I'm not sure why. Let's flush the gross cache. Maybe I'll find it here. Oh, gross to flush cache. Let's try that. Yeah, it's not generating it again, which is weird. You have to go here. Oh, okay. Alright, our grass looks pretty rough. Looking at the frame rate, the grass itself isn't that badly optimized. This is actually pretty good. Yes, there's going to be a lot of white, especially in the lower LODs. And the higher LODs, which are further away, because there's going to be more transparency. And they were dipping a little bit as well. But I do feel this is maybe a little bit... First of all, it's too dark here. So let's just get this back to what it was. I might even bump it up now that I finally figured out what the... that's too bright. Something like that. And then I'm not crazy about the subsurface isn't great. No, you could fix that. Also, what I'm not crazy about the color. I'm not crazy about the color. You can see the frame rate is also, it's taking quite a bit of a hit here. We don't need the grass to be this thick, to be quite honest. Let me just quickly close and reopen. The grass isn't supposed to disappear every time you... so I'm not sure what's going on there. It's not doing it in our main project, and we're using the same version, so it's not... It must be some kind of... something fishy. Let's just knock this down to about 300. And I need to bring this down. Because it's uniform, I don't need to set... I don't think I have to set them all individually, do I? Right, let's give that a save. To get this working again, just hit the landscape, come back. I'm not going to be flushing the cache again. And save that, and let's play. Yes, it's a little sparse. And it doesn't look that great. And that could also be the choice of mesh that I'm using. Could be that too. The subsurface also makes a difference, as you can see. This way it's this dark green, the sun behind us, and the sun, with the sun in front of us. And then this way, where the sun is shining, it looks really like, it's almost like the color just washes out. So that tells me as well the sun is too bright. It's just way too bright. Let's bring it back to 7 out here. And then also this is really not, it's not thick enough. So let's just leave it at 400. And then just hit the landscape and go back. I don't know why it's doing that. So it's a little bit thicker here, a little bit more lush. You could probably go more. You can see there the frame rate's 120. So it's not struggling to render this. And yeah, the grass looks iffy. So you would, yeah, I would go in here and play with it a bit. And then you can see the cutoff. I also chose a really, look how far the grass is rendering. Man, the grass doesn't need to render that far. Let's bring this down. I think, let's go, yeah, 20 to 23,000. I think that's better. You don't need the grass to render that far into the distance. And there you can see the tiling all happening quite a bit. Let's increase this. Now we're going to be pushing it a little bit. It's going to become a point where it's just going to be too much grass. Like this, you can see it's taking a toll, but it's still managing pretty good frame rates. But yeah, I wouldn't probably not use this grass. What we could try, let's bring this back to, say, 300. And then let's take a look at it quickly. Switching on real time. You can see it is swaying very, very lightly or slowly or softly or whatever. That you can see here, it's definitely moving. If I leave that mouse cursor there, you can see the blade of grass is moving, but it's not working like it used to. Also, yeah, it could just be a combination of these tufts or puffs that I'm using here. You could try it without subsurface, but once you've applied subsurface to get it off, you have to re-import it as a new mesh. But what we could do is let's do a re-import for fun to see that workflow. So now you have something that you can iterate on and say, okay, I want to change this, I want to change that. Maybe I'm not crazy about these dark colors here. Let's see if we can get rid of that. I think it's got to do with the subsurface. Let's bring it up, or it just could be a shadow issue. It's still pretty, it's still pretty dark in places there. If we disable subsurface, you can see it just, everything turns to really dull color. Maybe it's ambient occlusion settings. It also makes it darker. Okay, let's try one more thing here. I'm going to bring this up to 40. I'm going to clump them a little bit. A little bit further apart, maybe. Let's try this. And the folding, I think the folding's okay. I'm not always crazy about the folding, but it's okay. So maybe you should try and use a little bit more, a little bit wider tuft of grass if you can find one. And also maybe a little bit more detail. I think this might also be a little bit low. No, not really. I mean, it looks okay. The detail, I mean, the grass itself looks a little bit weird. Not really entirely sure if it is the subsurface though. Let's knock down the percentage to half. So now we got a lot more grass here. So that means Oh, that means it's going to be more expensive. It's going to be more expensive to render, obviously. So we might not see our nice, and this time I'm not going to just save, I'm going to save incremental. I could try syncing them in a bit more. Let's see, I've sent them in quite a bit now. It's like 30%. Let's just re-export them and just come in here and re-import it. It's looking a lot thicker. It's looking a little bit better. This looks a lot painty. There's floating grass there, which you won't get rid of easily. But now we might be able to turn down. Well, it's pretty lush. And the frame rate's not doing too terrible. Just once again, when we go this side, it does look a little bit weird. Especially near the top, it almost looks like it's painted. So what I would do is I would try different grass meshes, different grass textures. This isn't terrible, it's not a bad texture. It's just it looks a little bit weird. You could also try playing with the colors, try playing with the sync. Maybe we could sync this down even a little bit further. Also, I think this might be on the over thick side. Can I bring it back? So if it does that, just hit your landscape tool, come back. So even on 300 it still looks pretty good. So I mean, this is pretty well optimized, except for the higher level of details with the lower resolution meshes. They don't optimize so great. But it looks cool. See what we get now. Oh, that still looks okay, and the frame rate isn't dipping down to 70. There it went 90. So that's pretty cool. So then you would iterate on this until you find something that you like. Find a texture that you like, find a mesh that you like. Maybe this is the look that you were going for your grass, this Christmas tree. And also you could change up your level of detail meshes in SpeedTree a little bit as well, and see what effect that has when you go in. That's low, so when you go in and change these, see what effect that has on the meshes going further back. Because to change this now, save it and export it is pretty quick. Now if you were to go the other way and make this pretty sparse, so you're going to start seeing more of your terrain and less of your grass. That could also work depending on certain scenarios. So let's bring this down more to like 50. So there could be scenarios where you would prefer this, you know, more sparsely populated grass, and it still looks okay from a technical standpoint. You could go even more, or even less, I guess. And then it just, you know, depending on the scenario you're creating. you could control it. But I don't mind the fuller look for this kind of grass. I think that's going to wrap up this video. Thanks for watching.